hopefully you will see that empiricism is more or less the view that you and I have been taught through school, in probably every science class we've taken, and even in mathematics. It's the view that we really don't have any knowledge at birth, that any knowledge we have we acquired after birth by what our five senses tell us. Even though it looks like these people are examining the leaves on the trees, and you can say, you know what, I don't like getting bogged down in all this technical stuff, you know? Can we get back to discussing, you know, things like God, free will, whether there's anything, you know, that's not relative in morality, you know, hot button issues like that. These people are making all these tedious little technical distinctions. But I can assure you that the point of view these people came up with ended in skepticism, and it affected a lot of what went on in philosophy following them. And the thing is, if you're unsure of whether your basic knowledge claims are reliable, that extends not just to whether or not I know that there's a table in front of me, but whether or not I can ever know that I have free will, that I'm the same person as I was a week ago, that scientific laws like the law of gravity are going to work tomorrow, like I believe that they will, whether or not I can know that I have free will, whether or not I can know that there are any non-relative moral beliefs, or is everything just subjective, just a person's individual call. You know, a lot of these views ended in very skeptical views regarding all of those subjects. So even though it seems like these people are being tedious and technical, and you want to say, what has what they think is important got to do with anything else? Get me back to some of those hot button topics. Well, you know, everything that's going on here affects everything in terms of those hot button topics in philosophy. I like this area. I was working on my doctorate on a Scottish philosopher named Thomas Reid, who responded to the skeptical views of these people while Hume was still alive. And so I've been over the British Isles twice, presenting papers, commenting on them. We call these people the British empiricists. As I think I said last time, John Locke is from England, George Berkeley from Ireland, David Hume from Scotland, all part of the British Isles, hence British empiricists. So what is empiricism? Well, these are a couple of definitions from books. I don't think one of these is your book text. The philosophy that demands that all knowledge comes from experience, comes from what our five senses tell us, and you see this in the next definition. An empiricist maintains that we can know something if we can justify it with respect to what we see, hear, smell, touch, or taste. Right? And if you think about it, that's pretty much the view of knowledge that you've gotten from science courses. The distinction in the next two slides is not one that I'm going to spend a lot of time on. But we can make a distinction between basic empirical beliefs, the ones that we have from our own immediate experience, right? Here's somebody who believes that there is a telephone on the desk in front of her, right? What justifies her believing that there's a telephone on the desk in front of her? Well, seeing a red telephone produces in her belief that there is one in front of her. So my seeing the telephone myself justifies my belief that there's one that's there. So basic empirical beliefs are beliefs that are directly derived from what we immediately experience. But there are other beliefs that we have that are not about what you and I have directly experienced, but that are inferred from those beliefs. Like, as far as we know, Jurassic Park is still science fiction, right? Nobody's yet cloned a dinosaur from dino DNA. Right? Nobody's seen a brontosaurus up close and personal. But we still believe on the basis of what our senses, on the basis of evidence we've gotten from our senses, what our senses tell us, that brontosauruses once roamed the earth. Why do we think we know that? Well, we've got things like fossil footprints and even fossil skeletons. So there are inferential empirical beliefs that are beliefs that are not about what is directly observable, but that are inferred from what is directly observable. Right? We can directly observe a dinosaur footprint. When we were kids, our parents would take us up to New York to look at the dinosaur fossils from the Natural History Museum. Which is a great trip to take one of your kids on. I know some of you have small children, because I was dating somebody who had gotten a job as a school teacher, and she said, "Man, I got to do some unit for the kids. What's a good idea for me to do?" And I said, "You know what? Dinosaurs. You cannot miss with dinosaurs." And she did. She took my advice and did a unit for these elementary school kids on dinosaurs, and it went over well. So my belief in unseen dinosaurs then is still justified empirically by reference to seen and felt fossils and fossil footprints. Empiricism is a very attractive view on knowledge. It's basically based on empirical evidence that seems very reliable and objective, both for everyday life and for the sciences. Right? We rely on knowledge gained from observation, or observation aided by instruments like telescopes. Nonetheless, this is a theory of knowledge that historically ran into a lot of problems. Remember, Descartes started out with skeptical arguments, but he didn't want to end there. Descartes was not a skeptic at rock bottom. He wanted to show that we can have better justified knowledge than we thought we had of the basic beliefs that he questions at the beginning. He tries to get it all back. And, remember I said, how does he do this? Well, he tries to prove the existence of a God who's no deceiver, who won't deceive us in our beliefs about, for instance, there's a real table in front of me. And how does he prove God's existence? By relying on what he thinks are his absolutely certain innate ideas. Now, innate ideas, again, are ideas the empiricists claim we have at birth. And he says, well, I have this one example, the cogito ergo sum, the I think, therefore I am. I have an example of absolutely certain knowledge. And we said last time, he says, how do I know that the cogito is necessarily true? And we said he relies on a visual metaphor, that it has the quality of clarity and distinctness. So, to prove the existence of God, he relies on his innate idea of God. But suppose I said, you know what, Descartes, I mean, how does he know his innate idea of God is true? Well, because he says it has the same quality of clarity and distinctness that the cogito, the I think, therefore I am, had. But we could challenge Descartes. We could say, Descartes, how do I know that the ideas I have that are clear and distinct are necessarily true, like you say they are? And Descartes would say, you know what? God exists. And God guarantees, because he's no deceiver, he guarantees that what I perceive clearly and distinctly is necessarily true. Okay? How do I know that there exists a God who is no deceiver, who guarantees the truth of my clear and distinct ideas? Why, Descartes would say, well, I can prove the existence of a God who's no deceiver by relying on my necessarily true, clear and distinct ideas, like my necessarily true, clear and distinct idea of God. Does anybody sense a problem with that? The empiricists could not take Descartes' way out of skepticism. For one, it amounted to reasoning in a circle. And in Logic 101, I guess we call it 102 here, basic logic, we teach people that reasoning in a circle doesn't get you anywhere. You're basically assuming in your premises what you're supposed to be proving in your conclusion, so you haven't proven anything if you reason in a circle. And Descartes' way out was one big circle. He needs God to exist and be no deceiver to guarantee the truth of his clear and distinct ideas. And how does he know that God exists and is no deceiver? He has to rely on assuming that his clear and distinct ideas are necessarily true. And the whole thing goes in a circle and doesn't prove anything. So that was one reason why empiricists like Locke couldn't take Descartes' way out of skepticism. And there's another reason too. So empiricism had real problems with perception and with justifying the beliefs that we have, and they could not take Descartes' way out. For one, they thought it amounted to just reasoning in one big circle. And he didn't really get us out of skepticism like he thought he had. But also, Descartes' way out depended on assuming that we have some necessarily true knowledge at birth. For later rationalists like Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz, we don't talk about Spinoza and Leibniz, because Descartes is enough to give you an idea of what went on with the rationalists. They thought we had some innate knowledge. Now, you know, for Christians, the Christmas season is coming up, right? What do they call a manger scene, where you have the baby Jesus there? A nativity scene. The word innate, ideas or innate knowledge, has the same root word as you find in nativity. It's knowledge, ideas we have at birth. So they thought God put certain knowledge in us at birth, and our reason was a special end to discovering what this knowledge was. The empiricists say, Locke says, you know what? When we come into this world, that's what our minds are like. A blank tablet. Locke rejected the rationalist claim that we have innate knowledge, some knowledge at birth. For him, there are no innate ideas. So they can't take Descartes' way out of skepticism, because his way out of skepticism also relied on assuming that we had innate knowledge, innate ideas, and the empiricists say, no, we don't. So they can't use it that way out. Locke uses a Latin phrase. Now, I didn't take Latin. You know, I wasn't like when I was in school, I used to wonder how come there weren't other kids in public school with long Polish names like mine. And it wasn't until much later that I found out that all the Polish kids, you know, were at the Catholic school. You know, they weren't in public school with me. You know, I came from a long line of Slovak Baptists. We were Protestants. In fact, one of the reasons they fled Catholic Poland and Czechoslovakia was religious persecution to come over here. So anyway, so I don't know much Latin like I would if I had gone to Catholic school. I know E pluribus union, right, from anyone. That's about the extent of my knowledge of Latin, right? But for Locke, the mind is a tabula rasa, a blank tablet, a blank slate at birth. And what writes on the tablet, it's experience we get by using our five senses. We don't have any innate knowledge. Now, Locke, by the way, did not just assume this and state it bluntly. Hey guys, there is no innate knowledge. No, there are 4 different books to Locke's main book on the theory of knowledge. Locke's book is called An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. He takes a whole one of those 4 books to argue against the rationalist claim that there are innate ideas. So he doesn't just assume it, he tries to prove that there is no innate knowledge. Now, folks, I wish you'd get your heads out of your phones. You know, I mean, I don't know how many times I have to tell people, you know, it really annoys me. I mean, if you're following along on your phone with a PowerPoint, fine, but if you're not, I wish you'd tell people to wait a half an hour before getting back to them. All right. So if you remember, we looked at Socrates and Plato's claim that there are that nothing's perfect in this world, right? there's no such thing as perfect equality. Socrates argues, how do we judge that two sticks or two lines are equal but not perfectly equal? Well, we had to learn what perfect equality was for Socrates and Plato before birth, when we were intimately acquainted with the form of perfect equality. We don't, because nothing's perfect in this world. Well, if you reject that account, or if you reject Descartes' account that God puts ideas like infinity and perfect equality and the idea of who God is in us at birth, if you reject that, then it's incumbent on you to provide some alternative story of how it is we seem to be able to understand and work with concepts that are concepts about nothing we experience in this world, like perfection and equality and God. So they provide a story, so don't get bogged down in the details of what's going on in the next few slides, but see what they're trying to do. They're trying to provide an alternative account of how it is we can have these concepts without their having to be innate. In other words, they're trying to give you the empiricist story of how we can do this. And basically, it's that they say, well, we have enough rational ability to construct these concepts from what we do experience. So, Locke then gave alternative accounts of the origins of many of the ideas rationalists claim to be innate. He tried to show how ideas like these can arise from experience, like either perfection, infinity, our idea of God. So, perfection. I don't like the illustration I gave here. I was trying to say I have an imperfect knowledge of computers, but if I removed all the imperfections, we could imagine what it would be to have a perfect knowledge. I'm watching pumpkins being pulled across in front of me. I couldn't see the people. I didn't know if it was people in suits. Okay, now that I've distracted everybody, so I like it. I mean, think of a rose, right? Most roses are imperfect, right? They might have a few dark spots on this or that petal, maybe a hole in one, or a petal's misshapen, maybe they're missing a petal or two. But imagine that you progressively remove those imperfections. Imagine a rose that doesn't have any dark spots, where all the petals are there and all the petals are shaped the way they're supposed to. In other words, you remove the imperfections and your mind can extrapolate out to what a perfect rose would look like, right? And so this is basically the empiricist story, that we can begin with an idea that our senses do give us, like the experience of an imperfect rose, and then we extrapolate it out to what a perfect rose would be. Or we can begin with something like an idea of limited space, or limited duration in time, or limited number. And he says we imaginatively repeat and compound it, using our mental powers of imagination and our reason. He says we can construct these ideas. And this is why the alternative school in mathematics, from mathematical Platonism, that assumes that the number 5 somehow exists, is called constructivism, It says, no, concepts like number, infinity, these are concepts that we construct ourselves. And this is the empiricist view, basically. So, as an example from our experience of some body moving in limited space, we can imagine what a body moving in infinite space would be, right? And so you see what their story amounts to. That we can construct these ideas ourselves from limited experience, and we don't need them to be innate like Plato and Socrates and Descartes thought in order to have them. Even our idea of God. Now Locke came from a Protestant Christian background. But again, he thought, well, our idea of God doesn't have to be innate. So, on the right, you find some of the characteristics of God in traditional monotheism. We went over these when we looked at, especially the ontological argument. God exists necessarily, is eternal, is all-knowing, omniscient, all-powerful, of infinite wisdom. And he says we can construct this concept of God from our limited experience. I did pass around. Yeah, there's a roll that went around. From contingent existence, the existence of things we see around us, we can imagine what necessary existence would be like. From limited duration in time, we can construct the idea of eternity, eternal time. It's funny, even in things like New Testament Greek, that they didn't have the idea of infinity. When infinity is talked about in like Revelation, it's aiston ionion to ionio, into the age of ages. In other words, it imagines an age of ages rather than our concept of infinity. A little aside. But he says we can construct ideas like from limited knowledge. We can imagine what omniscience, total knowledge would be like. From limited power, we can construct the idea of ultimate power, omnipotence, all-powerful. So, again, don't get bogged down in the detail, but understand that the empiricists tried to provide alternative stories about how we got these concepts. And when my geometry teachers at Poly said, okay, there's a perfect triangle. It's an imaginary triangle. It's a human construct. There aren't any perfect triangles. They're pretty much taking the contemporary empiricist line that dates back to Locke and his view that we construct these things. They don't exist eternally. I'm a little bit ahead of where the other class was. So, let's do a little bit about this. When dictionaries and dictionary writers formulate a definition, some people have exactly backwards what happens. Some people think that it's dictionary writers and the people who construct them that make up the definitions that we all are then to use. But it's exactly the opposite. in order to get a dictionary definition of a word, the people who construct them look at how educated people who are skilled in the use of, say, English, their own language, use the word, and they'll look at examples from literature, and then they will try to construct a definition that reflects how educated people are actually using the word, what they mean by it, as best they can tell, when they use that word. But there's another type of definition, and we're not going to go into technical terms for it, where somebody stipulates what the meaning of a word is going to be. It's called a stipulative definition. But I'm never going to ask you that. And part of what you got to see here is, in order to really understand Locke, you got to see what's going on with his use of the word idea. And you have to understand that for Locke and the other British empiricists, the word idea becomes a technical term, and they give it a specific narrow definition. Okay? I think what I'm going to do, even though we have a few minutes left, is cut it off there, because this is a good way to start with what Locke meant by idea for next time. I know I didn't get through all of Locke, but remember, the test is it's not going to be on anything we don't get to, right? That's part of the reason why I wait till late in the day to make up a test. Or, so, just cover what we cover. We probably aren't going to get to anything on free will before that test, but I'm going to try to get through most of the empiricists. But for Locke, he gives us a technical definition of idea. An idea is whatever we experience. Whatever it is which the mind can be employed about in thinking. Anything you experience is an idea. And in the slides that follow, you'll see that makes him include things under the word idea that most of us wouldn't. Sensations and the like. But again, you got to see that he is getting out what he knows is a special technical definition of the word idea. And so, okay, thanks a lot. I'm feeling a bit better. Again, I waited till Monday morning to make that decision because I was hoping I'd feel better than I did Sunday night, but instead I felt much worse. It was only progressively Monday that I began to feel a little bit better. Then I overdid it Tuesday, and I went to Essex, so I actually feel worse today than I did Tuesday because I overdid it yesterday. But I'm still trying to get over this cold. But okay, if anybody missed the roll, it's in front. Let me set it on the desk. Thanks very much, and we'll see you Friday.